What if the life you trusted was built on lies from the very beginning? She believed she had it all: love, security, a future she could count on. But behind every promise was a hidden truth, and behind every smile, a carefully guarded secret. When reality finally breaks through, it doesn't just shake her world, it destroys everything she thought she knew.
Please.
But in that
I'm trying my
destruction,
best.
something powerful awakens, because she refuses to stay a victim. She rises, stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim what was always hers. This isn't
have
just
to
a
see
story
this
of
right
betrayal.
now.
It's a story of awakening, resilience,
It's about
and
your
unstoppable
brother.
strength. The lesson? The truth may hurt, but it also sets you free. Trust is earned, not given blindly. And sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to rebuild something stronger. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support is what keeps us going and helps us bring more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The laptop was still open on the kitchen island when Chloe saw it. No fight, no confession, just a project folder left open by mistake. Inside, among the blueprints for a skyscraper, was a subfolder titled Santorini. It wasn't filled with architectural plans, it was filled with photos of her husband Julian, his arms wrapped around his lead designer Simone. They were laughing on a boat, kissing under a blue dome. Her world didn't end in 30 minutes. It ended in the 3 seconds it took to click open that folder. She had been with Julian for 5 years. She was carrying his child. She had built her life around his dream. She thought they were a team. She was wrong. They waited until she was asleep, this digital affair they'd carried on for months. They erased her from his future, one secret trip at a time. He told her he was at a conference. He told her he was working late. But there was one thing his pictures didn't show, one detail he couldn't have known. She was 10 weeks pregnant, carrying the future he never planned for, and her resolve was hardening with every beat of her heart. By the time he realized she was gone, she had already vanished. By the time he came looking, she was already building something he could never design, never finance, and never own: a life without him. This is the story of a woman who lost her future in a single click, and what she built from the digital ashes in the days that followed. This will shatter your heart, lesson, and value. This story isn't just about infidelity, it's about the exact moment a woman decides her own 2 feet are the only ones she can count on. It's a powerful truth that your value isn't defined by the person who betrays you. It's forged in the strength you discover afterward. No shared apartment, no promises, no last name can hold you captive unless you hand over the keys. And sometimes, the life you thought you wanted has to burn to the ground to light the way to the one you need. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own resilience or the strength of someone you admire, drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Chloe? Smash that like button if you believe a woman's greatest project is her own life. Share this with anyone who needs to be reminded of their power today. And if you're new to our community, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story. We share new ones every week, and believe me, the next one is a story you won't want to miss. Her world didn't end with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating click of a mouse. Simone, her husband's lead designer, smiled from the screen. She looked like she owned the Santorini sunset, which, in a way, she did. She owned the moment. She owned the secret. She owned the man standing beside her, the one Chloe had woken up next to that very morning. Chloe was still in her favorite oversized sweatshirt, the one with the faded university logo she'd had since college, long before she knew what it felt like to plan a future with someone who was planning another one without her. She stared at the screen once, twice. The images felt like a glitch, a virus. They couldn't be real. "What is this?" Chloe whispered to the empty apartment. Julian's face on the screen was relaxed, happy. Click, a photo of them clinking wine glasses. Click, a photo of Simone wearing his watch. Click, a countdown to the end of her life as she knew it. She thought of their joint savings account, the money they were putting away for a down payment, for the baby's future. $200,000. His texts from his business trip were still on her phone. Every "I miss you" was a lie. Every "wish you were here" was a betrayal. His deception was so complete, so practiced, it left no room for doubt. The message was clear. You were never part of this plan. The silence that came after was a physical presence. It filled the loft, buzzed in her ears, and settled on her heart like a block of ice. Julian. She needed to hear his voice, to hear him deny it. He was supposed to be on a site visit in Milwaukee, a quick overnight trip. He'd kissed her goodbye at 6 in the morning. She remembered his scent, fresh coffee, and the expensive soap she'd bought him. "I'll call you before bed," he'd promised. He never did. Chloe grabbed her phone from the counter, her hands numb. She could see them shaking, which felt odd because the rest of her body was frozen solid. She called Julian's number, the one she knew by heart, the one programmed under "My Whole World." It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. "Hey, you've reached Julian. Leave a message." She tried again. Same result, same cheerful, oblivious voice. A new kind of dread washed over her. She sent a text. "We need to talk. Now." The 3 little dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared, then vanished. He was typing, then deleting, protecting his story, protecting her. Chloe stared at the picture on the laptop screen. Simone wore a white linen dress and gold sandals. Her hair was a perfect cascade of beach waves. She looked like an ad for a luxury vacation. She looked like the woman who had stolen her husband. Julian would never just leave me, Chloe thought. But the evidence was right there. He had already left piece by piece, lie by lie. And by the time she found out, he was gone, and his story, their story, was a complete fabrication. The doorman buzzed from the lobby, a small, polite sound, a food delivery she'd forgotten she ordered. The sound meant life was moving on, even if hers had stopped. Chloe looked around the loft. 2 years of her life were in this space. Her design books on the shelf, her yoga mat by the window, a framed photo of her and Julian at the Chicago Street Fair, smiling at something she could no longer find funny. She opened the hall closet and pulled out the old duffel bag she used for weekend trips. It had a faint smell of campfire from a trip they took upstate 2 summers ago. She started packing in a daze. The smiling woman on the screen watched from the kitchen island, a silent warden over the dismantling of a life. 15 minutes. That's how long it took Chloe to pack up 5 years. 15 minutes for her clothes, 3 minutes for her toiletries, 1 minute for her most important design books. She left the expensive jewelry. She left the designer coat Julian had bought for her birthday. She left the gourmet espresso machine on the counter. She took the photo from the street fair. She took her grandmother's locket from her jewelry box. She took the silly coffee mug that said "World's Best Plant Mom" that her best friend Maya had given her. The savings account, she thought, looking at her banking app. Keep it, she decided. She didn't want his money. It felt tainted, like part of the lie. Something flickered in her reflection on the dark phone screen. Not sadness, but a spark of defiance. "You were making a mistake," she could almost hear Julian saying. "Maybe," she thought, "but it will be my mistake." She walked to the front door, past the architectural models and the fresh flowers he always insisted on, past the life they had built that now felt like a stage set. She opened the door. The hallway air felt different. Heavy, still. It was a cloudy day, and the light from the hallway fixtures seemed dim. She walked to her car in the parking garage, the beat-up sedan she'd owned since grad school. It looked tiny and worn next to Julian's gleaming black SUV. She threw the duffel bag in the back seat, got in, and started the engine. And then she looked up at their apartment window, floor number 22. The lights were on. She imagined him there, maybe not now, but soon, with her. He'd bring her to their home, a place where Chloe's things still were, where her scent still lingered in the air. He was 34 years old and had built a career on designing foundations, all while the foundation of his own life was a lie. He was probably smiling, not the tired smile he gave Chloe after a long day, but the satisfied smile of a man who thought he had gotten away with it. Chloe felt a cold clarity move through her. Not grief, not yet. It was a primal understanding that she had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and the architect himself had just handed her the demolition papers. The garage gate opened with a low hum. Her car rolled out onto the street, and the gate slid shut behind her with a soft thud. The sound was quiet, but final. Metal on concrete, dull, absolute. She drove for 20 minutes before she pulled over into a Target parking lot, the kind with bustling shoppers and carts rattling over the asphalt. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel. 10 and 2, just like her dad taught her. She checked her phone, unlocked it, stared at Julian's last text, sent that morning at 6:07 a.m. Have a great day. Love you. She locked the phone, unlocked it, read it again, locked it, unlocked it. Searched for a typo, a hesitation, a crack in the facade. There was nothing. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and just sat in the quiet hum of the engine. A woman pushed a cart full of diapers and formula past her car. A group of teenagers laughed as they walked toward the entrance. She didn't cry. God, she wanted to, but the tears felt pointless, stuck behind a wall of pure, undiluted shock. She was 31 years old. She had a duffel bag, a car with over 100,000 miles on it, and absolutely no idea where to go next. She put the car in drive. The drive to Maya's condo took 45 minutes through city traffic. Chloe didn't turn on the podcast she usually listened to. She didn't answer the call that came in from her mom. She drove in a silent bubble, watching the traffic lights change from green to yellow to red, a rhythm that felt completely disconnected from the chaos in her head. Maya opened the door before Chloe even finished raising her hand to knock. She must have seen her car pull into the guest parking spot from her balcony. Maya was like that, always paying attention. She took in the sight of Chloe, her tear-streaked face, the duffel bag clutched in her hand. Maya didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh my God." She just pulled her into a hug and held the door open wider. "The guest room is all yours," Maya said softly. "Towels are fresh. I'm ordering deep dish pizza in 10 minutes, and you are going to eat at least one slice." Chloe just nodded, unable to speak. She walked inside and sank onto the sofa. Maya sat next to her, a quiet, solid presence. For a long time, they said nothing at all. The apartment smelled like eucalyptus and fresh linen. The city hummed outside the window. A siren wailed in the distance, its cry fading into the Chicago hum as another week dissolved. Chloe felt like she was wading through molasses. Time had slowed, each moment thick and heavy. The days were a gray smear of existence. She'd get out of bed when her roommate, Maya, nudged her. She'd eat whatever Maya placed in front of her. Most nights, she'd just lie awake, tracing the hairline fractures in the ceiling plaster, imagining they were escape routes to a life she no longer had. She frantically searched for work. She was an architectural designer with a rising reputation, a portfolio full of sleek, innovative projects and glowing testimonials. In the first week, she sent out proposals for 14 different contracts. She got 3 enthusiastic initial responses, followed by sudden, deafening silence. Video calls that seemed to be going perfectly would end with a vague, "We'll be in touch," and then nothing. Project managers who had been eager to connect were suddenly always in a meeting. One potential client, a boutique hotel developer, had the decency to email her back directly. "Chloe," it read, "I'm sorry, but we've decided to go in a different direction." The project had been a perfect fit, a near-guaranteed contract. Someone was pulling strings, someone whose name carried enough weight to slam doors she hadn't even reached for yet. The Croft name was a ghost haunting the city, an invisible, unbreakable barrier she kept walking into. On the 15th day, Chloe woke to a violent wave of nausea. She barely made it to the bathroom, her body convulsing as she gripped the cool porcelain of the toilet bowl. It had to be stress. That's what she told herself. Her system was in open revolt against the past 2 weeks, against the sleepless nights, the unanswered emails, and the solid, cold dread that had taken up residence in her chest. The sickness returned the next morning and the one after that. On the third day, Maya leaned against the bathroom doorframe, arms folded, as Chloe splashed her face with cold water. "When was your last period?" Maya asked, her voice gentle but direct. Chloe froze, the water dripping from her chin. "I don't know," she whispered. "Try to remember." Chloe's mental calendar was a chaotic jumble of project deadlines, flights to see Julian, and the sharp, final memory of his mother's polite, dismissive smile. But beneath the static, a number flickered into focus. 6 weeks? No, closer to 8. 8 weeks, Chloe said, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. Maya disappeared without a word and returned 20 minutes later, holding a small paper bag from the drugstore. Inside were 3 different brands of pregnancy tests. Maya was never one to leave things to chance. Chloe took all 3. She slid to the floor, her back against the cool tiles of the wall, hugging her knees to her chest while the little plastic wand sat on the edge of the sink, deciding her future. The exhaust fan whirred overhead, a monotonous mechanical sigh. 3 minutes. The instructions promised an answer in just 3 minutes, an eternity that stretched and warped. She finally forced herself to look. A pink line, another pink line, and a third. 3 for 3. A perfect, terrifying consensus that left no space for doubt or hope. Chloe remained on the bathroom floor for a long time after, unsure how many minutes or hours had passed. Long enough for the morning sun to creep across the floor and warm her bare feet. Long enough for Maya to knock softly and ask, "You okay in there?" "I'm pregnant," Chloe said, her voice a flat, hollow echo against the tile. She wasn't speaking to Maya. She was telling the fan, the universe, and whatever cosmic entity had a sense of humor so twisted it was almost impressive. 8 weeks pregnant with Julian Croft's baby. The man whose phone now went straight to a disconnected message. The man whose family had blacklisted her so thoroughly she felt like a ghost in her own career. She buried her face in her hands. "God, I was so blind," she muttered into her palms. The evidence had been there all along. The nausea she'd mistaken for anxiety. The crushing fatigue she'd blamed on emotional turmoil. The slight tenderness in her breasts she'd thought was just her period being late again. She dropped her hands and stared at the 3 tests lined up on the counter like a firing squad. "I have to tell Julian." Maya appeared in the doorway, her expression a careful, measured mask. It was the face she made when she was trying to keep her own anger in check. "And how are you going to do that?" Maya asked. "His cell is disconnected, he's not on social media, and his personal email bounces back." "I'll go through his office," Chloe said, a desperate plan forming. "The main line at Croft Enterprises. They can't all have me on a block list." But they could, and they did. Chloe called the next morning, using her most professional tone, the one she reserved for difficult clients and zoning board meetings, calm, firm, unshakable. A bright, young-sounding assistant answered, "Croft Enterprises, how can I help you?" "I need to speak with Julian Croft, please. My name is Chloe Dubois. He'll know why I'm calling." There was a brief silence, the soft click-clack of a keyboard, and then the cheerful warmth vanished from the assistant's voice. "I'm afraid Mr. Croft is not accepting calls from this number." The line went dead. Chloe stared at her phone as the screen faded to black, her own haunted reflection staring back. She didn't recognize the woman with the dark circles under her eyes and the tangled mess of hair. She set the phone down, then picked it back up, her thumb hovering over her banking app. She opened the shared account Julian had insisted they get for furnishing their apartment. She didn't care about the money. She just needed to see his name linked to hers, some digital proof that their life together had been real. The account was gone. "Account closed," the screen read. "Balance 0. All funds transferred out." She scrolled through her phone's contacts, a digital graveyard of their life. Julian's driver, his favorite tailor, the contractor they were using for the penthouse renovations. She called each one. Every number was disconnected or no longer in service. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a methodical, professional demolition of her entire life. It was as if someone had hired a cleanup crew to meticulously scrub every trace of her from Julian Croft's world, and that crew was terrifyingly good at its job. That night, Chloe lay in Maya's guest room, watching the shadows of the ceiling fans spin across the walls. She rested a hand on her stomach, still flat, still betraying no secrets. "I'm going to be a mother," she whispered into the dark. A mother in a city where her career was being systematically dismantled, with no savings, no partner, and no home of her own. The baby's father didn't even know she existed anymore, and his family had made damn sure of it. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand, an unknown number flashing on the screen. She nearly ignored it, letting it join the chorus of ignored calls from blocked clients and dead-end leads. But some impulse made her answer. "Is this Chloe?" a woman's voice asked, low and rushed. "You need to know what they're saying about you." Chloe sat bolt upright, the blankets pooling around her waist. "Who is this?" "That's not important," the voice hurried on. "What's important is that Julian thinks you betrayed him. His mother, Eleanor, she showed him fabricated evidence. She made it look like you sold the design specs for his new River North Tower to a rival firm." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could feel the pulse beating in her throat, her temples, the palm of her hand pressed hard against her stomach. "I would never do that," she breathed. "I didn't even have the final specs. Julian knew that. I helped him with the initial concept sketches." "I know," the voice said softly. "That's why I'm calling." And then the line went dead. Chloe sat in the pitch-black room, clutching her phone to her chest. The screen's glow illuminated her pale, shocked face before dimming again. Outside, a late-night bus hissed to a stop and pulled away. Maya's cat, a small ball of black fur named Poe, leaped onto the bed, circled twice, and curled up against her hip, purring. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, one hand protectively over her abdomen, tracking the slow rhythm of her own breathing. In, out, in, out. Each breath was a tiny rebellion. "I am not going to beg," she vowed to the darkness. "I have never begged for a single thing in my life, and I am not about to start now, not even for him." The cafe was called The Daily Grind, a cozy spot 2 blocks from Maya's apartment, nestled between a vintage bookstore and a yoga studio. It was the kind of place with local art on the walls and baristas who had your order memorized by your 3rd visit. Chloe got there early, ordering a chamomile tea. The barista shot her a questioning look. "Tea?" he asked. "Rough night," Chloe replied with a wry smile. "Rough year." She chose a small table by the window, watching the morning foot traffic. A man in a suit power walking while yelling into his phone. A young couple holding hands, laughing at something she couldn't hear. The world kept moving, indifferent. At 9:15, the bell on the door chimed. Isabel Vance walked in, exuding the kind of effortless polish that suggested she had never known a rough day in her life. She scanned the room, her gaze coolly dismissing it as quaint before she spotted Chloe. She was wearing sunglasses, indoors, which she slid off and placed precisely on the table. Her eyes were perfect, her smile tight. Chloe had seen dozens of photos of Isabel in society blogs, usually on Julian's arm at some gala or charity auction. She was the woman Eleanor Croft had always wanted for her son. The merger, the upgrade. "Thanks for coming," Isabel said, her voice smooth as silk. She didn't sit, but instead rested her manicured fingers on the back of the opposite chair. "Sit down, Isabel," Chloe said, her own voice steady. "You called me, so let's talk." Isabel sat, her posture ramrod straight. She ordered Heir an espresso she never touched. "I'm not a monster," Isabel began, which was, Chloe thought, exactly what a monster would say. It wasn't an apology, just a statement of fact, delivered like a stock market update. "I'm not a monster, Chloe, but I'm also not stupid." Isabel then spent the next half hour laying it all out, not with remorse, but with a chilling pragmatism. She'd been at the Croft family estate for dinner the weekend after Chloe had been exiled. Eleanor had called it a cleansing of the palate, a fresh start, and Isabel was the main course. After dinner, she'd gone looking for the powder room and overheard voices from Julian's father's study. It wasn't an argument, it was a strategy session. Eleanor and Julian's father, Richard, were calmly walking through the narrative. Richard had hired a digital forensics guy to create a believable email chain, complete with data logs, showing Chloe communicating with their biggest competitor. Eleanor had a bank statement printed, showing a large, unexplained deposit into Chloe's personal account, a supposed down payment for the stolen plans. They weren't just telling a lie. They were building a fortress of deceit, piece by painstaking piece, to make it impenetrable. Isabel said the documents looked impeccably official, showing digital blueprints transferred from a secure server to a personal cloud drive under your name, with timestamps going back 6 months. It was a perfect narrative of corporate espionage, as if you'd been planning to betray him the whole time you were together. Clara felt the porcelain teacup in her hands, the warmth seeping through to her fingers. She gripped it tighter. I never created a cloud drive linked to the company server. I refuse to have that kind of access to their proprietary files. I told Leo that from the start. I know because I'm a gallery curator, Clara. I deal with digital provenance and security certificates constantly. The certificate on that drive belongs to a deep archive, the kind that requires board-level clearance to create. You couldn't have made it. Only someone with a key to the entire Vancorp mainframe could have. Genevieve. The name hung between them in the quiet gallery cafe, a single word for such a devastating betrayal. Isabel filled in the rest. Leo had been pulled into a video conference with his sister 3 days after landing in Singapore. She told him Clara had been caught, that the evidence was irrefutable, that Clara had sold the blueprints and left of her own accord. After signing a confidentiality agreement and taking a substantial payout, Leo had insisted on speaking to Clara. Genevieve told him Clara refused, that she had said, and Isabel quoted her precisely, "Tell him I got the legacy I was after." Clara shut her eyes. The gallery sounds dissolved, the quiet hum of the climate control, the distant murmur of patrons, the soft click of a door. She was back at the university lecture hall 5 years ago, a Thursday afternoon. A guest speaker was discussing urban renewal, a man with a confident stride and a passion in his voice. He was dynamic but also a little lost, talking about profit margins instead of people. She challenged him from the audience, asking about architectural integrity. He seemed surprised, then intrigued. He found her afterward. "What is your name?" "Leo. Do you know who I am?" "A developer, obviously." He almost smiled. "That's a first. Most people lead with the family name. I make it a point not to be impressed by things people are born with. That is refreshing. You're going to make me work for this, aren't you?" He looked at her, truly saw her not as a student or a potential conquest, but as an equal. "You haven't asked my name," he said. "Should I have? It might be polite. I'm not always polite. And your name isn't going to change the fact that you almost advocated for tearing down a historical landmark." He laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound. "Okay, you've got me. Can I at least know the name of the woman who just dismantled my entire presentation in under 30 seconds? Clara. Clara. Okay, Clara. Since you're clearly unimpressed by my family's billion-dollar portfolio, what would it take for you to let me buy you a coffee? Leo, you have a room full of investors waiting for you. Let's start with a rain check. Is that a no? That's a not right now." He came back the next week, showing up at the architectural library with 2 coffees and a worn copy of a book on historic Chicago brickwork. "I don't have a keynote speech this time," he said. "So, technically, you have no professional reason to say no." She said yes. Their first date was exploring an abandoned factory on the south side, not some Michelin-starred restaurant. A place Clara had mentioned, and Leo had said, "Perfect. I'm tired of places where the menu is longer than the conversation." They sat on a dusty concrete ledge, watching the sunset through broken windows. He ordered a pizza to the gate, and they ate it out of the box. He had a smudge of grease on his cheek for half an hour, and she didn't tell him because it made him seem real in a way she couldn't explain. He told her about growing up in the Vancorp Tower, the pressure, the loneliness, the feeling of being a figurehead in his own life. "You looked at me like you actually heard what I was saying," he said. "You treated me like a mind, not a brand, just a guy who needed to be reminded what he was fighting for." Those memories now flickered in the gallery cafe, a film projected onto a screen she couldn't shut off. Each moment precious, each one now suspect. Was any of it true? If his family could dismantle her life so easily, was he ever really separate from them? Or was he always a Vancorp first and a man second? Isabel was watching her, waiting. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked. "Because Genevieve offered me a seat on the foundation's board. She's been grooming me for months as Leo's appropriate partner, and I thought I wanted it. I thought, why not? He's charming, he's powerful. It's a good life." Isabel paused, finally picking up her tea. She took a sip, her expression unreadable, but I listened to them construct this fiction about a woman whose only sin was actually believing in their son. And I knew that if they could do that to you, they'd do it to me the second I was no longer useful. The day I become an inconvenience, I become you. Clara nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. The shared awareness of two women on opposite sides of the same gilded cage, viewing it from different angles. "What do you want from me?" Clara asked. "Nothing. I just thought you deserved to know. What you do with the truth is up to you." Isabel slid her sunglasses on, left a 50 on the table, and walked away. Clara sat alone. The tea was cold. A cleaner was polishing the glass display cases. The afternoon sun cut through the high windows in sharp architectural lines. She looked out at the street. A couple was arguing by a valet stand. The woman was pleading. The man kept glancing at his watch, distracted. The woman gestured emphatically, her hands shaping her words, while the man just nodded, his attention clearly elsewhere. Clara watched for a moment too long, recognizing something in the woman's desperate energy. The specific exhaustion of someone trying to build a bridge to a person who had already retreated to the other shore. She looked away, picked up her cup, and drank the cold tea because leaving it felt wasteful. That night, she was in her studio at 2 a.m. The glow of her drafting lamp cut a circle of light in the darkness. The smell of paper and graphite filled the air. She sat on her stool, staring at the blueprints for her latest project, but seeing nothing. Round and round her thoughts went, a dizzying cycle of betrayal and loss. The quiet hum of the city, the scent of old books and fresh ink. A design magazine lay open beside her, 6 months old, with a feature on sustainable urban living. She placed a hand on her stomach, still flat, still a secret from the world, but real as the ache in her chest, as real as the steady hum of her computer, as real as the tiny, fragile life that was, at this very moment, becoming a person. Her person. Clara didn't sleep anymore, not in any meaningful way. She existed in a twilight state where the past and present blurred, where memories replayed on a loop, but her mind was clear. Sharper than it had been in months. The haze of grief was burning away, not because the hurt was gone, but because something colder and more solid was forming in its place. Resolve. Not the fiery, shouting kind, not the kind that breaks things, the quiet kind, the kind that settles deep in your bones and says, analyze the structure, find the weakness, then push. She started with the server, not the fabricated documents, but her own project files. She was a meticulous archivist. Her entire career was built on it. Her professor in college taught her that blueprints don't lie, but developers do, and the original plans will always reveal the truth. Clara logged into her personal archive, pulling up every email exchange, every file transfer log, every digital note from the past 2 years. She spread them out on her screen, a digital map of her professional integrity. Then she remembered what Isabel said. A deep archive, board-level clearance. She remembered Leo once mentioning his family's private server, a digital fortress. He'd told her the password hint was the name of his childhood dog, Kepler. She found the login page. She typed it in. She was in. With each click, the digital forensic software painted a sickening picture. Maya had recovered fragments of deleted data from Ava's laptop, showing how someone had remotely accessed her design portfolio. The access logs showed transfers of Liam's new waterfront project files to an encrypted, untraceable email address. 18 months of a carefully constructed digital trail, all pointing to Ava. But the timestamps were all wrong. 3 of the largest file transfers happened when Ava's laptop had been offline, locked in a studio locker while she was on a 3-day photography shoot in the San Juan Islands. Ava knew because she had the ferry tickets and 100 timestamp photos to prove it. And then Maya found the ghost in the machine, a trace of the remote user's IP address. It had been routed through a dozen public proxies, but one fragment remained. It pointed to a public Wi-Fi network at a 24-hour coffee shop in Belltown. It took them 6 hours and 4 pots of black coffee, but they found it. A cross-reference of the access logs with security footage from the adjacent building, footage Maya legally gray area acquired, showed a familiar figure huddled over a laptop at 2 in the morning. Chloe, Liam's junior designer. Ava sank back into Maya's couch, the room spinning. The floor was covered in printouts of network logs. Maya's cat, Pixel, was batting at a curled-up Ethernet cable. This was the proof. Chloe had installed a Trojan on her laptop, waited for the right moments, and built a meticulous case for corporate espionage, presenting it to Liam as a devastating betrayal. It wasn't just a lie, it was a piece of architecture itself, designed with a sociopath's patience and the particular arrogance of someone who believed they were smarter than everyone else. But the motive was a gaping hole in the story. Chloe wasn't poor, she came from a comfortable family. She had a promising career at Liam's firm. She drove a new Audi and lived in a trendy downtown condo. She didn't need to sell his designs. The answer arrived 2 days later. Maya, fueled by righteous anger, had kept digging. She found Chloe's private, locked-down social media account, a Finsta. Over dinner, she slid her phone across the table. Ava scrolled, her food growing cold. It was an obsessive shrine to Liam. Candid photos of him at the office, his head bent over blueprints. Lengthy, fawning analysis of his architectural philosophy, and then the posts about her. Vicious, jealous tirades disguised as pity. He's shackled to a woman who doesn't understand his genius, one post read. She's a distraction, not a partner. The jealousy was a living thing on the screen. It wasn't about money, it was about possession. Chloe didn't want Liam's wealth. She wanted his life, with her in Ava's place. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. Ava's hand went to her stomach. "When does Liam's big pitch for the waterfront project happen?" Ava asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maya checked her calendar. "Next month. If he wins that, the firm goes to a whole new level. He becomes a star." Ava put down her fork. The gourmet mac and cheese on her plate looked like paste. Chloe wasn't just trying to get her fired or break them up. She was trying to surgically remove her from Liam's life right before his biggest triumph, positioning herself as the one who was there to help him pick up the pieces. As long as Ava was with Liam, especially with their son on the way, she was the foundation of his world. And that foundation was a lock on a future Chloe desperately wanted for herself. She wasn't just betrayed, she was being replaced. The baby inside her was the anchor holding Liam to a life Chloe was determined to sink. The realization was a sudden, violent plunge into ice water. If she finds out I'm pregnant, the baby solidifies my place, and that makes us both targets. She looked across the table at Maya, who was watching her with worried eyes. "I can't tell anyone else. Not yet. Not until I figure out what to do." She told 2 people, Maya and her older sister, Isabella. She called Isabella on a Tuesday evening, knowing her sister, a corporate litigator, would still be at her office in Chicago. Isabella would be closing out a file, the city lights glittering behind her, the way she did every night. She answered on the first ring. "Izzy," Ava started, her voice cracking, "I need to tell you something." Isabella Russo listened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't gasp, she didn't offer empty comforts. She listened with the focused intensity of a woman who had cross-examined Fortune 500 CEOs, raised her twin brothers after their parents died, and had never lost a case that went to trial. When Ava finished, choking back a sob, there was a pause long enough for Ava to hear the distant wail of a Chicago siren through the phone. "I'm clearing my calendar for the week," Isabella said, her voice flint. "I'll be there tomorrow." "Izzy, you don't have to." "Ava Maria Russo," Isabella cut in. "I've been deposing arrogant liars for 15 years. This one can wait. You can't." Isabella arrived the next afternoon. She walked into Maya's apartment with a leather carry-on and a briefcase that probably cost more than the couch. She looked at the living room floor, covered in network logs and surveillance photos. She looked at Ava. She looked at the dark circles under her sister's eyes and the protective way her hands hovered over her belly. She didn't hug her. Not yet. That would come later. Instead, she sat down at the dining table, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a sleek, modern tablet. She put on a pair of minimalist glasses, the kind that made her look even more formidable. She had Maya walk her through the digital evidence, swiping through lines of code and IP address maps. She did this for nearly an hour. Ava and Maya sat on the couch, watching. The apartment was silent, except for the soft tapping of Isabella's finger on the screen and Pixel purring on a stack of legal pads. Then Isabella looked up, took off her glasses, and folded them with a decisive snap. "This girl is an amateur," she said, a dangerous calm in her voice. "Ambitious people always are. They think their ambition makes them clever. It doesn't. It just makes them reckless." She picked up a stylus and started annotating screenshots, highlighting inconsistencies. The mismatched timestamps, the impossible file sizes, the digital fingerprints Chloe failed to wipe. "We're going to need a private investigator," Isabella said. "A real one. Not some guy from a phone book. Someone I use for corporate cases. Someone with a background in digital forensics who can make this evidence admissible in court." Ava nodded. The suffocating grief in her chest was no longer a cold, dead weight. It was igniting, not into a wildfire of rage, but into the steady blue flame of resolve. "I didn't lose Liam. Chloe stole him. There's a difference, and I am going to get him back." That night, Ava couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from the whirring of a machine coming on lines in her mind, planning, strategizing. She lay in bed, a hand on her stomach, and for the first time since the morning Liam had looked at her with cold eyes, she felt something other than pain. She felt powerful. 300 miles away, in a suite on the 35th floor of a hotel in Portland, Liam Donovan was drinking whiskey at 2 in the afternoon and staring at the city's skyline without seeing a single building. Ava didn't know this. She wouldn't know for weeks. But Maya's friend at the firm told her eventually, in short, pained texts. The way you describe watching a building collapse. Not all at once, a detail here, a detail there, each one more crushing than the last. Liam had believed Chloe. That was the deepest cut. Not that Chloe lied, but that he trusted her instantly, completely, without a single question. Chloe had approached him in his office, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. She told him she found something he needed to see. The evidence was irrefutable, she'd said. When confronted, Ava had broken down and confessed. She'd claimed she felt trapped, that she was lashing out, that she'd already packed a bag and left. She said, and I quote, Chloe had told him, her eyes welling with fake tears, "Tell him I'm sorry, but I needed to be free." Liam tried to call Ava. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Chloe said Ava had blocked his number, that she wanted no contact. And Liam believed it because why would Chloe lie? She was his protege, his brilliant and loyal designer. He could imagine Ava being unhappy. He could imagine them fighting, but he couldn't imagine this kind of cold, professional betrayal. So he crumbled, the way men do when they've been taught that heartbreak is a silent, solitary failure. He drank, he skipped client dinners, he stood in the hotel shower with the water scalding hot until the steam choked him, and then stood there longer as it turned ice cold. His business partner found him passed out on the couch in the hotel suite twice. A career-making project worth hundreds of millions of dollars was moving forward entirely on his reputation, while he just numbly signed whatever documents Chloe slid in front of him. He didn't read a word. At night, he lay in the king-sized bed and was haunted by Ava, the way she'd bite her lip when she was concentrating on a photo edit, the way she arranged the books on their shelves by the color of the spine, creating a rainbow. The night they tried to build a piece of IKEA furniture and ended up laughing so hard at the confusing instructions, they just ordered a pizza and sat on the floor among the pieces. And now, all of it was poisoned. Those memories were spoiled, rewritten by Chloe's lies. The woman in them wasn't the woman he'd loved. At least, that's what he told himself. Ava learned most of this from Maya, who got it from her contact inside the firm. Ben, a junior architect, saw what was happening. He watched Chloe isolate a devastated Liam, her concern cloying and manipulative. "It's like she's a vulture," he texted Maya. "He's a wreck, and she's circling." Ava knew she had to reach him, but not through channels Chloe could control. A text could be dismissed, a call could be blocked. She needed to present him with something undeniable. Working with Maya and Isabella, she didn't write a letter. They built a case. They compiled everything onto a secure, password-protected webpage, a digital dossier of the truth. It had Maya's full forensics report. It had the security camera stills of Chloe in the coffee shop. It had screenshots of Chloe's obsessive secret blog posts. It had a signed affidavit from a forensic expert Isabella hired. It was an airtight, irrefutable presentation of the entire calculated deception. Ava typed out a single email, pasted the link, and wrote a subject line with 2 words: the proof. The evidence of Genevieve's plan, the routing of the blueprints to a shell corporation, the forged access logs that proved she couldn't have transferred the files on the dates listed. She didn't beg or plead. She drafted a single, concise email. She attached the evidence, clear, documented, verifiable proof. And at the end, she wrote one personal line: "I never wanted the Vancorp portfolio. I never wanted the Vancorp name. I wanted the man who stood in a lecture hall and was reminded of his own integrity. If that man is still there, he will know this is the truth." She sent it to his private email address in Singapore. She knew it from a trip they had planned together 6 months ago, a trip they canceled when Genevieve had a crisis that required Leo's immediate return. The email arrived in his inbox 4 days later. An algorithm monitoring the server flagged it instantly. It looked at the sender's address, then at a rule set up by an administrator with a Chicago IP address, a rule that offered a $100,000 bonus for successfully isolating and redirecting any correspondence from Clara Hayes to Leo Vancorp. The email was rerouted. 40 minutes later, a notification popped up on a different laptop. It was delivered not to Leo's penthouse suite, but to a secure folder on a laptop in a Chicago office, Genevieve's office. Genevieve read the email, all of it. She read it while sitting at her minimalist desk, sipping an espresso and looking out over the city. Then she saw the attachments detailing the pregnancy. She set down her cup, picked up her secure phone, and called her head of security. "We have a complication." Clara didn't know the email had been intercepted. She waited. 1 day, 2, 5, a week. She refreshed her inbox. She checked her phone. She stared at the unread receipt she'd requested. Nothing. He isn't coming. He saw the proof, he knows the truth, and he chose them. That was the thought that finally fractured her composure. Not the false accusation, not the career sabotage, not the fact that she was pregnant and alone. The thought that Leo held the truth in his hands and simply let it go. She didn't know he never saw it. She didn't know it was sitting in his sister's encrypted archive, filed away between a market analysis and a gala seating chart. She didn't know, and the not knowing was the most brutal part of the architecture. A week after the argument, Clara's world fractured on a screen. It was a picture, a single professionally lit shot on a popular Chicago food blog. Her husband, Julian, the city's culinary golden boy, with his arm wrapped tightly around Simone, a rival food critic. The caption was a dagger. Chef Croft is cooking up more than just new dishes these days. A friend with a pained expression had shown it to her. Clara scrolled through the comments, a tidal wave of strangers and industry insiders dissecting her marriage in real time. They called her naive, a fool, the oblivious wife. They speculated on the state of her life based on one poisoned image. Her own career, built on a reputation for precision and trust, began to fray. A major gallery that had been courting her for a prestigious restoration project sent a curt email. "We've decided to pursue another direction." Simone's network was vast and vicious. Within 2 days, the gossip solidified into a story everyone knew. Clara Croft, the brilliant restorer who couldn't even restore her own marriage. Clara sat on a stool in her private studio, the relentless buzzing of the comments still echoing in her head. She didn't feel anger or even sadness. What settled in was a profound, hollowed-out exhaustion. The kind that steals your breath and makes the simple act of standing feel monumental. She pushed her phone away, turning it face down. She walked over to her easel, to the damaged 19th century oil painting she was working on. She picked up a cotton swab, dipped it in solvent, and began to clean. The meticulous, patient work of lifting away a century of grime to find the true color beneath had always been her sanctuary. The sharp, clean scent of turpentine filled the small space, a welcome antidote to the city's stale air. With painstaking care, she worked on a small patch of canvas, watching as a sliver of vibrant cobalt blue emerged from a sea of brown. The focused intensity of her work, the quiet scrape of her tools, the slow, deliberate reveal of beauty from decay. It was a meditation. Then, a sudden sharp thump from within. The baby kicked. It wasn't a flutter this time, but a real, solid, undeniable press of a tiny foot against her. It was a message in a language older than words. I am here. Clara instinctively placed a hand over her belly, holding her breath. The studio was silent save for the hum of the ventilation. A small, secret smile touched her lips. Not because the world was fixed, but because she was creating something far more important than the wreckage Julian had made. 5 months. That was the number she carried. 5 months of a life growing inside her while her own life unraveled. She had just secured a contract to restore a series of portraits for a private collector, the kind of job that promised stability through the months ahead. But just as she was building a new foundation, her body began to rebel. It began with a pressure behind her eyes, a relentless headache that felt like something trying to force its way out. Then her feet swelled, and tiny black spots began to drift across her vision like ghosts. She knew, even before her doctor, Anya Sharma, spoke the word. She knew. Preeclampsia. It was early, manageable, but it was a storm warning. Strict bed rest, Dr. Sharma said, her voice gentle but firm. Starting today, not after you finish the week, now. I can't, Clara pleaded. I have a contract, a deadline. I don't have paid leave. Clara, if your blood pressure climbs any higher, we're talking about hospitalization. This isn't a suggestion. Clara sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table, the fluorescent lights overhead humming. She could hear a toddler wailing in the next room. My insurance doesn't kick in for another 60 days. We'll figure that part out. You need to go home. Home. The loft studio with the paint-splattered floors. Home, where there was no one to bring her a glass of water or check on her, or be there if everything went terribly wrong. She drove back to the loft, took the freight elevator up, and walked into the quiet space. The smell of linseed oil felt mocking. She sat on the edge of her unmade bed, the silence of the room pressing in on her, making everything feel louder in her head. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the contacts. She scrolled right past Julian's name, a ghost she refused to summon. She passed the numbers of gallery owners, suppliers, clients, a whole life that was now on hold. Then she found the number she was looking for. She pressed the screen. It rang 3 times. Mom? Clara, what is it? What's wrong? How they always knew from a single word. I need you. Isabel didn't ask why. She simply said, I'm closing the shop. I'll be there before the sun comes up. Mom, it's a 4-hour drive. Then I'll be there before the sun comes up. Don't you dare argue. The line went dead. Clara lay back, her eyes tracing the cracks in the high ceiling. She put a hand on her stomach. The baby was quiet now, perhaps sensing the shift in the world. Waiting. 2 days later, her blood pressure spiked. Isabel drove her to the hospital, her small car weaving through Chicago traffic with a fierce determination. They admitted her immediately for monitoring. Room 307. The bed was caged with metal rails. The constant, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor became a kind of torture, each pulse a reminder of her body's betrayal. The blood pressure cuff automatically inflated every 15 minutes, a relentless squeeze on her arm. The sterile air of the room seemed to pulse in time with her own ragged breaths. A young nurse, all cheerful efficiency, came in to run through the vitals. She glanced at the tablet in her hand. Is there a father we should notify? Clara looked down at the admission form, at the stark, empty line next to father's information. The pen felt heavy in her hand as she finally wrote a single word. None. The nurse saw it, offered a tight, professional smile that betrayed nothing, and moved on to check her blood pressure. That night, alone in the glowing dimness of the hospital room, Clara found herself scrolling through apartment listings on her phone. She'd erased every trace of Liam weeks ago, but the phantom limb of their life together still ached. Now she was looking at studios in Pilsen, one-bedrooms in neighborhoods she'd only ever driven through. The photos were bleak. Kitchenettes with 2-burner stoves, living rooms so narrow you could brace your hands on opposite walls. She'd squint at the screen, trying to imagine where a bassinet could possibly go. Tucked by the radiator, in the space where a closet should be? In most of them, there was no space at all. No room for a baby, no room for a life. She shut her phone off. The monitor beside her beeped softly, and the cuff on her arm tightened. The room breathed. At 3:14 in the morning, Eleanor Mayhew pushed open the door to room 412. She was wearing her old tweed coat, the one that always smelled faintly of Earl Grey tea and the antique books she sold in her little shop. She carried a small suitcase, a thermal bag filled with homemade soup, and the unyielding expression of a woman who had just navigated 6 hours of torrential rain and would gladly do it again. She didn't speak right away. She set the suitcase down, placed the food on the windowsill, and dragged a visitor's chair to the edge of the bed. Then she reached out and took Clara's hand. Her grip wasn't tight, nor was it loose. It was simply there, a solid, unwavering presence. That was when Clara finally broke. The tears she had been choking back since that morning finally came, hot and ugly. It was a messy, gasping sob that shook her whole body, the sound of a child who had been trying to be an adult for far too long. Eleanor didn't say a word. She didn't shush her, didn't murmur that everything would be all right, didn't offer any easy comforts or false hopes. She just held her daughter's hand and let the storm break because she knew that sometimes that's the only thing a mother can do. And sometimes it's more than enough. When Clara's sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, Eleanor handed her a tissue. "All right," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Now tell me everything about the photographs Liam sent to his family." Even here, surrounded by the quiet beeps and hums of the hospital, Eleanor Mayhew was not one to waste a single moment. Outside, rain slicked the windows, distorting the parking lot lights into blurry halos. "I'm going to be a mother," Clara whispered, her voice raw. "That's more real than any lie, any inheritance, any man who lets his family discard me. This baby doesn't care about doctored images or family trusts. He only knows my heartbeat, and my heartbeat is strong. She tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Liam hired someone to hack my accounts, she said. Eleanor's expression hardened. How are you sure? Chloe called me this morning. She was in his office and saw the invoice on his desk. He has my entire email history, my private messages. He knows about the high-risk pregnancy, and he knows it's a boy. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, the only sounds being the clock's steady tick and the soft whir of the monitor. Then, a slow, grim smile touched her lips. Good, she said. A man that desperate gets sloppy. At 7 months pregnant, the small apartment near the L tracks always smelled of either cumin from the taqueria downstairs or the turpentine she used for her painting. Clara stood in what she now called the baby's corner. The place was too small for a proper nursery, but she'd hung a thick curtain she'd sewn herself to create a separate space by the window. She was painting a mural on the wall behind it, a collection of pale yellow city birds. She had paint in her hair and a smudge on her cheek. Her ankles were swollen, her back screamed in protest, and her doctor would have been horrified, but she needed this. The simple physical act of creating something beautiful and orderly in a world that was entirely her own. Eleanor had moved onto the pull-out sofa for a little while, which they both knew meant for the foreseeable future. She made dinner, she kept the apartment tidy, and on Fridays, she visited the pro bono legal aid downtown. She came back with pamphlets, notes, and finally, a name, Marcus Thorne. He was 55, semi-retired, and his office was in an old, unglamorous building in the Loop that smelled like dust and strong coffee. He wore suits that were a decade out of style and drank his coffee black and bitter. He'd worked for Sterling Realty, Liam's family firm, 20 years prior. He'd been their in-house counsel for 3 years before leaving abruptly. Creative differences, he'd said when Eleanor first asked. That's the polite term. The less polite version is that Harrison Sterling asked me to bury an unfavorable structural report on a new condo development. When I said no, I was given 24 hours to pack my things. He never elaborated on the details, and Clara never asked. Some doors are better left unopened. Eleanor brought him over on a Tuesday evening. He sat at the small kitchen table that served as Clara's everything surface, sipping the brutally strong coffee Eleanor had brewed. Clara laid out the evidence. The original, high-resolution photos from the gallery event. The forged ones Liam had sent his family, clumsily edited to show her with another man. The complete, unedited email exchanges with the client in question, and the fabricated, incriminating versions Liam had created. Marcus examined every file, every timestamp, every pixel, with the quiet focus of a man handling something both sacred and explosive. In this situation, it was both. When he was done, he removed his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. He looked directly at Clara. "This is more than a messy divorce," he said, his voice low. "This is libel. And if he used email to transmit these falsified documents with the intent to defraud you in the divorce proceedings, that's wire fraud. We aren't just looking at a civil case anymore. We're talking about serious criminal liability." The weight of his words settled in the small room. "What's our first move?" Clara asked. "First, we lock everything down. If Liam gets even a hint that you have the originals, he'll scrub his entire digital life. I'm filing a preservation order tomorrow morning. It legally freezes all of the Sterling family's digital communications related to you. Nothing can be deleted. Nothing can be altered." "Will that alert them?" "Yes," Marcus said. "But it also means they can't hide what they've done." Clara nodded, glancing over at her mother, who stood by the stove with her arms crossed. On her face was an expression of what could only be described as a smoldering, righteous calm. The days that followed were filled with a tense quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Clara worked part-time at the gallery, she cooked, she read books about newborns. She opened a new bank account and deposited $27. It wasn't much, but it was hers. On a Tuesday afternoon, she went to the grocery store. The aisles were quiet, and she moved slowly down them, one hand on the shopping cart, the other resting on her stomach. The baby was restless, his kicks and stretches a constant, reassuring presence. At the checkout, the woman ahead of her was young, with the exhausted look of a new parent. A toddler sat in her cart next to a large box of diapers. The woman swiped her card. Declined. She tried again. Declined. Her face flushed as she looked helplessly at the cashier, who stared back with the practiced indifference of someone who sees this happen a dozen times a day. The woman pushed a bottle of wine to the side and kept the diapers. Clara put a bottle of the same wine on the belt with her own items. In the parking lot, she saw the woman wrestling the toddler into a car seat. "Here," Clara said, holding out the bottle. The woman stared at her, then at the wine, then back at Clara's very pregnant belly. "You can't even drink that," she said, confused. "I know," Clara replied. "That's why you should have it." The woman took the bottle, and for a brief second, their eyes met. No words were exchanged, no stories shared. It was just a silent acknowledgement between two women holding their worlds together with everything they had. Driving home, the car smelled like the cheap air freshener Clara's friend had given her. A song she didn't know came on the radio, but she hummed along to it anyway. That night, Marcus called. There was a new edge to his voice, something sharp and urgent. "I spoke with an old contact at Sterling Realty," he began. "Someone I trust, who still owed me one. Liam's older brother Julian is flying back from Dubai next week. He's seen the articles, the social media whispers, all of it. Liam fed him the whole story." Clara's knuckles went white as she gripped the phone. And he's furious," Marcus said. "At you. He believes every single word." Clara closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cool kitchen wall. The baby delivered a swift, powerful kick as if in protest. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Chloe called my office this morning. Liam proposed to her last night." "What?" "He said it was time to solidify the family's image. His mother's idea, apparently. A united front, two Sterling brothers, happily settled. It makes the whole scandal with you disappear." "What did Chloe say?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "She said yes, and then she went into the bathroom and was sick." There was a long silence on the line, punctuated by the ticking of the clock on her wall. "She wants to help, Clara. She told me to tell you, and these were her exact words. Tell me what you need me to do." Clara opened her eyes. The small kitchen felt warm and safe, smelling of the soup Eleanor had left simmering on the stove. The pale yellow birds on the baby's wall seemed to glow in the lamplight. For months, she had been reacting, just trying to survive, absorbing one blow after another, only to brace for the next. She'd been playing defense while the other team owned the field. That was over. "Tell Chloe I need Liam's laptop," Clara said, her voice clear and cold. "I need his entire hard drive, specifically the original, unedited photo files, any Photoshop project files that would show the edits and layers, and every single text message between him and his mother." "That's an incredible risk," Marcus said softly. "She's engaged to him. She lives in his penthouse. She has access." "If she gets caught," Marcus warned, "it's over for her and for our case." "Then," Clara said, looking at the small mural she had built with her own two hands, "she better not get caught. Modelli." Julian's business partner, Leo, showed up at the hospital. He looked uncomfortable in the sterile environment. He didn't bring flowers, he brought a tablet. "Clara, I am so sorry," he said, his voice low. "You need to see this." He played a video. It was security footage from the bar the night the picture was taken. It showed everything. Simone hiring a freelance photographer she knew. Simone waiting until Julian was a few drinks in, laughing and leaning into him, positioning him perfectly for the shot. Simone reviewing the photos on the photographer's camera and then paying him in cash. Leo had found the bartender, who confirmed it all. It wasn't a chance encounter. It was a meticulously staged assassination of her marriage. From a shared cloud drive labeled San Diego Project, a confirmation of a deepening betrayal. A scan of every receipt, every photo, all 8 gigabytes of them attached to a folder Chloe stumbled upon. She had seen every word, every intimate message Liam wrote to Ava, every inside joke, every lie, and she saved it all. The fabricated business expenses were there too, in draft form, 3 versions. The first was messy, with wrong dates and inconsistent amounts, the kind of fraud that would never survive an audit. The second was cleaner. The third was polished, professional, convincing. Liam had practiced like a con man, learning to perfect his grift, getting closer and closer to something that could pass as legitimate. And then the messages, a thread between Liam and his best friend Mark, brief, matter-of-fact, the language of 2 people who understood each other perfectly and didn't waste words. Liam, the new hire is handled. C will never know. Mark, good. When is Chloe's baby shower? Liam, next month, bring a nice gift. She responds to gestures. Mark, I always bring a nice gift. Chloe printed everything, 3 copies, 1 for her files, 1 for her lawyer, and 1 for a safe deposit box that only her sister knew about. She had the locks changed the next morning, an emergency decision. All of Liam's access to their shared life, their home, their future, was now legally and physically blocked from him. The order was served to Liam by a locksmith at 9:15 in the morning, who reported that Liam's face went very pale, very fast. Mark found out by noon, his parents by 1, his mistress by dinner. And Liam, by the next morning, was back in Chicago. He stood outside their condo, the same home where he had promised Chloe a lifetime of honesty just 7 months ago. He was thinner. The secret affair had hollowed him out. His suits fit differently. His eyes had the flat, dull quality of someone who had stopped sleeping and started lying for a living. He called Chloe about the locks. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of tea and a magazine she was not reading. A performance of normality. It is a nuisance, Chloe said, her voice cold. That woman is trying to destroy our family. It is what people like her do. People like her. People who do not belong. Liam looked at his phone, his own reflection staring back. He was 63 years old in his own mind, aged by deceit. He had raised his hopes with precision and distance, like a gambler who plays the odds but never touches the cards. He had spent his entire life seeking her love and receiving, at best, her companionship. I want to see the evidence, he said. It was the project files, the proof that she was working with you. Your friend Mark handled that. Then I want Mark to show me. Liam, darling, this is beneath you. Let the lawyers manage it. But Liam was already walking out of his office down the hallway to his car. The car was his favorite room. Walls of glass, leather seats, the smell of new car scent and burnt coffee. It was the car where he had driven Chloe on rainy afternoons. She liked pop music. He liked classic rock. They would sit in the front seats, her feet on the dashboard, singing along in companionable silence. He drove to the street where Chloe used to work. Her favorites were still there in the shop windows. She had not taken them. A collection of abstract paintings, a dog-eared book about local artists, and tucked inside his glove compartment, between pages of the car manual, a photograph. Chloe and Liam, their first vacation. They were at the beach. She was holding an absurdly large seashell. He was laughing at something she said. The photo was taken by a stranger they asked to use their phone. On the back, in her handwriting, small and careful, "Thank you for seeing me." He stared at the photograph for a long time. The light in the car shifted. Afternoon became evening. The shadows grew longer. He remembered that was their thing. The thing she said in the hospital after his appendix burst. The first thing that made him fall in love. "You looked at me like you actually saw me." Liam turned the photograph over, looked at her face, looked at his own face, the happiness in it, the particular kind of happiness that comes from being known by another person. He tried to reconcile this woman with the woman his friend described, the paranoid wife, the schemer, the woman who said, "Tell him I got what I came for." It did not fit. The pieces did not match, like a puzzle with a piece from a different box. He called her old phone number, the one he used to call 10 times a day, disconnected. He called the apartment they had looked at together before she moved in with him. A new tenant, never heard the name. Every road back to her had been demolished, not by accident, by design, with the thoroughness of a demolition crew following orders. He had never tried to reach her himself after the fight. He let his friend handle it. He trusted him, and they used that trust like a key to a door he did not know was being locked. Sunday dinner, the family table, crystal glasses, silver flatware, the good china that his mother reserved for occasions when appearance mattered more than comfort. His father at the head, his mother to his right, his brother across from him. The table could seat 14. 4 people made it feel emptier. Liam set his phone on the table, screen up, on it the photograph from the car. Chloe and the seashell, his own laughing face, the handwriting on the back. He did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the table. He spoke quietly, the quiet that comes before storms. "Where is she?" His brother looked at the phone. His fork paused midway to his mouth. Then he resumed eating. "Who?" "You know who." His mother set down her napkin. "Liam, this is not the time. Where is Chloe? What did you do? And do not lie to me, because I have spent 7 months believing every word you told me, and the woman in that photograph is not a paranoid schemer." Silence. The kind that fills a room like water. His brother took a sip of wine. His father stared at his plate. His mother adjusted her pearls. Then his father spoke. The man who had not offered a meaningful opinion on anything in 20 years. The man who signed what his wife asked him to sign and attended what his wife asked him to attend and played the role of patriarch the way an actor plays a character he is tired of. His father looked up from his plate, looked at his eldest son, and said 5 words that broke the machinery of the family's deception. "Tell him, dear, or I will." His mother turned to her husband. Her face did something Liam would never see but would have recognized. The surface cracked, just for a second, like a porcelain mask hit by a pebble. "Don't. No, not this time. I let you handle the dog. I let you handle the schools. I let you handle everything because it was easier than arguing with you. But this, our son is destroying himself over a lie we told him. And there is a child." The word landed on the table like a stone in still water. "What child?" Liam said. The silence stretched. The clock ticked, ticked, ticked. She was sitting on the floor of the baby's corner when the knock came. 8 months pregnant. The pale yellow wall behind her. A second-hand rocking chair she found at a thrift store, reupholstered with fabric from a shop on 9th Street. A mobile of paper stars that were not handmade hanging from a hook in the ceiling, turning slowly in the draft from the window. The knock was not loud, not aggressive. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the way you knock when you are not sure you have the right door. Her sister answered. She opened the door 6 inches and looked through the gap like a sentry. Liam stood in the hallway. He was wearing a coat that cost more than the apartment. His hair was different, shorter. His eyes were red. He looked like a man who had not slept in days and had recently learned that the last 7 months of his life had been built on sand. His sister did not move aside. "You do not get to walk in here like you are saving someone," she said. "She saved herself." Liam opened his mouth, closed it. He did not argue. He did not push past her. He stood in the hallway and accepted the assessment of a woman he had never met, who was blocking a door with the authority of a castle wall. "I know," he said. "I know I am too late. I know I should have looked harder, called harder, tried harder. I know all of that. And I know that knowing it does not fix anything. Then why are you here?" "Because she deserves the truth from me. Not from a lawyer, not from a court document. From me." His sister studied him. She had the eyes of a woman who had spent 30 years reading people across a diner counter. The regulars who were fine, the regulars who were falling apart, the strangers who were dangerous, the strangers who were just lost. She stepped aside, not all the way, just enough. Chloe appeared behind her mother. She was wearing maternity clothes that did not match. a gray sweater, black leggings, socks with a hole in the left toe. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup. The kind of rawness that cannot be faked because it is not a performance. She was 8 months pregnant. The fact of it hit Liam like a physical force, not the abstract idea of a child, the real, visible, undeniable reality of a woman carrying his son. He could not speak for 10 seconds, 20, an entire half minute of standing in a hallway in a building that smelled like dry cleaning chemicals, looking at the woman he had been told was a thief and a liar, and seeing instead the woman who once put a daisy in a paper cup on his emergency room tray. Chloe, do not say my name like that, like it is something you lost and just found. You did not lose me. You let them take me. There is a difference. He flinched, not visibly, but she saw it. She always saw the things he tried to hide. You are right, he said. I let them. I believed them. Without calling you, without checking, without doing the one thing I should have done first. Why didn't you trust me? The question came from Julian, standing in the doorway of her hospital room. He looked smaller than she remembered, stripped of his chef's coat and his usual confidence. Why did you just believe it? Clara leaned against the wall, her hand instinctively going to her belly, where the baby was now stirring. Believing it was the easy part, Julian. You spent months wrapped up in your own world, chasing reviews and accolades. You left a space for someone like her to walk right in. That picture wasn't the cause, it was just the proof. He flinched. I know. Do you have any idea how much I know that now? I was a fool. She played on every insecurity I had. He took a step into the room. Part of me wants to tell you to leave. And the other part knows that letting you back in means trusting that you've learned how to fight for us. And I'm not sure you know how. And I can't trust you anymore, Liam. I gave you all of it, and you gave it to her like it was some cheap trinket. Liam collapsed, not onto the plush sofa in their penthouse, but onto the cold floor of the hallway, his back hitting the wall. His tailored suit crumpled against the baseboard he'd never even noticed before. There were no dramatic sobs, just the silent, heavy reality of a man finally understanding the gravity of his own betrayal. Chloe watched him, the man she had built a life with, the man who'd shattered it, now looking utterly defeated in the space he used to command. She shut the door. It wasn't a slam. It was the soft, deliberate click of a lock, the quiet finality of a woman who no longer needed to raise her voice to make her point. Inside, she leaned against the cool wood. Her sister, Sarah, was in the open-plan kitchen, meticulously arranging blueprints that were already perfectly ordered. He's still out there, Sarah murmured. I know. How long are you going to leave him there? Chloe's voice was steady, as long as it takes for me to decide if I ever want to open this door again. The months that followed weren't a romance. They were a reckoning. Liam didn't beg. He didn't flood her phone with poetic apologies. He didn't appear with bouquets or lawyers proposing settlements. He appeared with her favorite pastries from the little bakery near her office, leaving them with the doorman. He didn't text. Chloe came home from a site visit to find the finicky air conditioning unit, which had been rattling for months, had been silently repaired by a professional. There was no note, no bid for credit, just cool, quiet air where there had been an annoying hum. He would sit in the lobby of her doctor's building during her prenatal checkups. She never invited him up. He never asked. Sarah started to acknowledge him with a stiff nod, which in Sarah's world was a seismic shift in diplomacy. She didn't approve, she didn't trust him, but she permitted his pastry deliveries, a gesture that bordered on forgiveness for her. The implosion of the Donovan real estate empire didn't happen with a dramatic crash, but with a quietly circulated portfolio. Marcus, a junior partner loyal to Chloe's father, laid out the evidence for the other senior partners in a glass conference room overlooking the Chicago River. Julian was there, so was Isabella, so were the 10 partners who had tied their fortunes to the Donovan name. Marcus was methodical. He presented the files one by one, the doctored project budgets, the email thread with the zoning commissioner, the text between Julian and Isabella outlining their secret side deal, the Shell Corporation filings linking the offshore account directly to Julian. Marcus never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He let the ink and paper do the shouting. Julian was forced out of the partnership by a unanimous vote, not charged, not yet, but exiled. Stripped of his title, his profit sharing, his company car, and his corner office with the unobstructed view of Lake Michigan. Isabella was strongly encouraged to take an indefinite leave of absence from her family's firm. Leave of absence was the polite term. The impolite version was, get out before we throw you out. Jessica, a paralegal who knew, testified. She sat in a leather chair facing the 10 partners and told them every conversation she'd overheard, every document she'd been asked to file, and every doubt she had swallowed by staying quiet. Her hands trembled, but her voice was unwavering. Afterward, she emailed Chloe 7 words. I don't know if we're friends, but thank you. Chloe emailed back 3. You spoke up. That evening, Chloe sat on the tiny balcony of her new apartment. It was small, just big enough for a single chair. She could see the glowing lights of Wrigley Field and, beyond that, a sliver of sky turning from orange to the deep, bruised purple that signals the end of a day. She sipped herbal tea from her world's okayest architect mug, her other hand resting on her stomach. The baby shifted, a gentle, rolling motion, like a tide turning within her. She stayed there for what felt like hours, not thinking about Liam, not thinking about Isabella or Julian, or the legal storm that was just beginning to gather. She was thinking about absolutely nothing, which, after nearly a year of thinking about everything, felt like the most profound luxury imaginable. The streetlights flickered on with a low hum. A man loaded equipment into a van. A woman walked by, laughing into her phone. Chloe found herself smiling, not because anything was fixed. It wasn't. It was all a beautiful, complicated disaster. But she was still here on a balcony with a cup of tea and a baby who was set to arrive in about 4 weeks, whether the world had its act together or not. She once believed strength was about endurance, about taking the hits and pretending they didn't hurt. Now she knew strength was about building something new from the rubble, something that was hers alone, something no one could cheat her out of or lock her away from. The baby arrived on a Thursday. Of course he did. Chloe had always disliked Thursdays. Liam had confessed on a Thursday. She had moved out on a Friday, but the baby claimed Thursday, and she decided to let him have it, to redefine the day. Labor lasted 20 hours. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was long, exhausting, and precisely as difficult as every woman who has gone through it knows it to be. Sarah held one hand. Her friend Olivia held the other. They worked in shifts. Sarah took the early part when the contractions were a slow build and the room was still. Olivia took over for the active phase when the pain came in relentless waves and Chloe squeezed her hand so tight Olivia's knuckles turned white. Liam was in the room. He was there because Chloe decided he could be, not because he demanded it, not because anyone pressured her, but because she looked at him and made a choice. He was standing in the sterile corridor of the maternity ward, clutching a designer duffel bag filled with things he guessed she might want. And in that moment, she saw a version of him she'd never witnessed before. This wasn't Julian Vance, the celebrated Chicago architect. Not the visionary whose blueprints remade skylines. Not the man who shattered their life for his protege. He was just a terrified man. A man on the verge of fatherhood, paralyzed by the fear of being in that room and even more so by the fear of being left out of it. You can come in, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He entered, taking a seat in the armchair by the window, a silent observer. He didn't speak unless she spoke first, didn't reach for her unless invited, didn't play the hero. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Leo Peterson was born. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a shock of black hair and eyes the uncertain color of a stormy lake. His hands were so tiny they looked more like a suggestion of hands than the real thing. Clara held him first, feeling the warm, solid weight of him on her chest, his heartbeat a new rhythm against her own, finding their tempo for the first time in the open air. She studied his tiny face, and he looked back with that ancient, unfocused stare of the soul just arriving in a world it didn't yet recognize. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm your mom. I've been waiting for you." She named him Leo Peterson, not Leo Vance. Her sister, Amelia, held him second. She settled into the rocking chair, cradling the baby, and began to hum a tune Clara knew from their childhood. A simple melody their grandmother used to sing when the summer storms rolled in, something about fireflies and a moonbeam watching over them. Amelia's voice wasn't polished. It was soft and a little shaky, full of love. It was the only sound that mattered in that room. Julian held him last. Clara watched his face as the nurse gently placed Leo into his arms. She saw the change, the instant unraveling and restitching of a man's entire being in the space of a few heartbeats. He said nothing. He just looked down at his son, who gazed back with that same unknowing, timeless expression. And Julian began to cry, not with sobs or drama, but with silent, unstoppable tears that streamed down his cheeks, landing on the hospital blanket one by one, like a leak that no one knew how to fix. "He has your eyes," Julian finally choked out. "No," Clara replied softly. "He has his own." Arthur Kensington, Julian's mentor, came to the hospital the following day. He showed up alone, his tailored suit looking out of place in the public hospital, his posture uncertain. He was a titan of industry who suddenly seemed adrift, a man who had commanded boardrooms now lost in a world of beeping machines and new life. He held Leo with a careful reverence, the way one might hold a priceless, fragile piece of art. "I should have said something," Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the baby, but his words meant for Clara. "I saw what was happening with him and Simone. I didn't intervene. I told myself it was just creative energy, that I was being old-fashioned." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "That's no excuse. It's just the truth." Clara listened to this powerful man confess his own quiet failure while holding her son. "I won't ask for your forgiveness for my part in this," Arthur continued, "but I need you to know this. This little boy is a masterpiece, and he will always have an ally in me." Clara gave a small nod. She couldn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But seeing him hold her son, hearing his regret, was a start. For that moment, it was enough. Simone did not visit. She sent an arrangement, not flowers, but a cold architectural sculpture of polished steel and glass, the kind of thing that wins design awards but offers zero comfort. A statement piece for a person performing a role. Clara looked at it. Amelia looked at it. "Should I throw it out a window?" Amelia asked. "Just throw it out." Amelia got rid of it, but she kept the heavy marble base. It made a good doorstop. Maya, Clara's best friend, arrived that evening. She brought a worn, beloved copy of a children's book and a container of her famous chicken soup. "For the little guy," Maya said, handing Clara the book. "He's going to need this when I teach him how to make a proper mess, because, no offense, but your idea of fun is alphabetizing a spice rack." "I'm fun," Clara insisted. "You're organized. It's different. That's why he has his Auntie Maya." Clara laughed. The sound felt foreign, startling not because it was loud, but because it was real. A genuine laugh, bubbling up from a place deep inside that she thought had been shattered. In the weeks that followed, the social gears began to turn. Rumors swirled through the city's design circles. Friends took sides. Phone calls were made, and alliances were tested. The slow, grinding process that turns a personal crisis into public gossip. Simone retained her position at the firm, a decision Julian made that felt like a fresh betrayal, but the evidence of the affair was undeniable. It wasn't in bank records, it was in the intimate photograph she had accidentally included in the portfolio for the National Design Prize, a picture that no amount of professional spin could explain away. It was a digital footprint that now existed on judging panel servers and in gossipy email chains. The story of their perfect creative marriage had been a lie, but here was the part Clara held on to, the truth that saved her. She was never part of that competition. She didn't know about Simone's desperate climb or Julian's weakness. or the professional stakes involved. She wasn't a player in their game. She was never a pawn on that board. She was a woman who had fallen in love with a brilliant man who got pregnant with his child, who had her heart broken, and who was now building a new world from the wreckage. The brilliant protege and the cheating husband was a story that existed entirely outside of her own. She was carrying their child, but she was not carrying their ambition. She was carrying her son. 3 weeks after Leo was born, a courier delivered a flat, rectangular package to her new apartment. Inside was a legal document. Julian had transferred 100% of the ownership of the house he had designed for them, their dream home in Lincoln Park, into an irrevocable trust in Leo's name. The trust was to be managed by an independent firm with Clara as the sole guardian with decision-making power. It was the complete surrender of his greatest professional achievement, done without a single phone call, without any conditions, and without Clara ever asking for it. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on drafting paper in Julian's messy architectural script. "I can't undo the damage," it read, "but I can give him the foundation I failed to give us. And I can spend whatever time I have left trying to earn back the privilege of being in your life." Clara read the note while sitting at the small kitchen table in her rental. Leo asleep in the crib, she had assembled herself using an online video and a borrowed Allen key. Her sister was on the sofa, absorbed in a book. The old radiator hissed, a comforting, steady sound. She read the note again, folded it precisely, and placed it in a shoebox filled with her mother's old photos and a ticket stub from her first date with Julian. She didn't call him, not that night, but she didn't throw the note away. Later, her phone chimed. It was a text from Maya. It was a picture of the worn children's book, now sitting on a shelf in Maya's apartment, next to a framed photo of the two of them from college, both in paint-splattered overalls, grinning, blissfully unaware of the lives that lay ahead. The caption said, "Keeping it safe for the little guy. Judging by the strength of his grip, he'll be ready to tear out the pages by Friday." Clara laughed again. That was twice in one day. A new personal best. She set her phone down, walked over to the crib, and watched Leo sleep. His tiny hands were balled into fists, his mouth making small, dreaming motions. The kick was sharp, a tiny little rebellion under her ribs that made Chloe smile. 7 months in, and their son already had an opinion about everything. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Chicago high-rise, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She was supposed to be relaxing, but instead, she was meticulously organizing Leo's digital portfolio for the Pritzker nomination. He was so close. They were so close. She felt a surge of pride, dragging a final folder of blueprints into the master file. That's when she saw it. A subfolder she'd overlooked, tucked away, named simply Nightingale. Curious, she clicked it open, expecting renderings of some new condo tower. It wasn't blueprints. It was photos. Dozens of them. A woman with sleek, dark hair laughing in a sun-drenched apartment Chloe had never seen. It was Simone, the ambitious new associate from Leo's firm. And the apartment, it was the spitting image of the stall development project Leo had been complaining about for months. But it wasn't stalled. It was furnished. It was lived in. A visceral, cold jealousy clawed its way up her throat. The life she was carrying, the life she thought they were designing together, was just a facade. This perfect home, this perfect marriage, was just a set of blueprints he'd shown her, while the real construction, the real living, was happening somewhere else, with someone else. Her hand flew to her stomach as the baby kicked again, a frantic, insistent rhythm against her palm. He didn't know about secret folders or betrayed trust or the hollow echo of a lie that now filled their perfect, empty home. All he knew was the frantic, broken rhythm of his mother's heart. He was the only part of the design that was real, the only part that was truly hers. That would have to be enough. Final thoughts. This narrative was thoughtfully constructed by our creative team to explore the fragile architecture of the human heart. Each character, every quiet moment, and each devastating revelation was designed with intention. We believe that stories are more than just a pastime. They are the framework through which we build empathy and understanding. We appreciate you staying with us through this journey.